it's over to the right side. It's the gear in Gmail over here on the overhead. Click on the gear and go down to settings. And we're going to go over to forwarding and pop mail, forwarding and pop IMAP. And even if you've done this before, it won't hurt to do it again. We want to change the status of email pop for all email, even mail that's already been downloaded. That first one under number 1. And then we also want to make sure where it says status IMAP, make sure it's enabled if it's not already enabled. And that's it. So number 1, the first radio button, or IMAP access, make sure enable IMAP is selected, and then click Save Changes. And by the way, while we're in here, we're going to use it in PHP, but there's also ways, if I go back to that settings, it shows you examples how to use this in other environments. So if I wanted to use it, for instance, it says here configure your email client, configuration instructions. It gives you step-by-step detail on how to do it for IMAP, POP, email, what's the difference between POP and IMAP if you don't already know, how will using a mail client affect automatic replies. And so it gives you examples of all that, what ports to use and things like that. So at the very bottom on this screen under IMAP access, it says configuration instructions. Has there as well what it is, how much does it cost, it's free, what's the difference, how will you use it, and it gives in here settings to set up Gmail for forwarding and POP. So just remember that. You can come back here and look at it as far as how to set it up. So let's talk about how we're going to use it. In week 8 practice lab, there's before the practice lab, there's actually a document called error handling we're going to go over. But before we do, let me show you an example of what we're doing here. If you guys go to the 8 practice lab section in our conference, there's a link that's under error handling example. If you'll click on that link, which I'm hovering on with my mouse on the overhead, it'll take you to this page here. The first example does inline error catching, meaning it catches it on the web page itself. So on the first box it says enter your full name. Second box says enter an integer value. Well, I'm going to put only Chuck in the first box and the letter A, which I know is not an integer value, in the second box, and click submit. Chuck, a variable must be a number, validation denied. All right, so I'll go back in here and put an integer value in there and see what happens here. Variable cannot be less than 1,000. Okay, let's put 1,005. There we go, Chuck, variable is valid. All right, so that's inline validation and inline error catching, which we'll go over in a second. And then the second one is what's called an exception error 2. This error shows on the form, and it also emails an admin. In this case, what we're going to do in class, show you how you can email your Gmail account behind the scenes exactly where the error is occurring on an application. So I'm going to click here this error 2 link, which we'll look at in a second, which forces an error. And so when I click on that, it's loading the page, and it says here better looking page error, meaning any page error within a PHP site, you can set up exception pages to look nice like this, okay, to where the user says, okay, something's going on here. We've seen it like in Chrome. I think it goes, oops, something went wrong here, something like that. You know, so a user-friendly error page is what this is doing. It says errors have occurred while executing this page. The administrator has been contacted with the error. Please try again. Now if I check my inbox on Gmail, no, it gives me exact error here on my inbox. You'll see it. So if I check my inbox, it says their error message is error type 2. And it's an error type 2 because it's an str replace expects 3 parameters, and I only gave it 2. We'll see in just a second. I only gave it 2 parameters. And so let me go ahead and blow that up just a little bit here. Again. Yeah, it's better. So error type is, or error message is because of this line here on my code. We'll see in a second. Now what's cool about it is on this error message, it also gives me the exact path of the file that errored out and the exact line where to go to on my PHP file. So in the practice lab, there's actually a link for the source file in the practice lab. I've already downloaded it. You can download it while I'm bringing it up here in Text Wrangler. And let me go ahead and open that up real quick. We're going to download or look at the lab for week 8. Source code. The exception 2 is the one I want to look at, the one that gave the email error anyway. So here is the function, PHP function. It has an include error.php file, which we'll look at in a second. In fact, let me open that up so we can see it. And that's important to have an error.php file that you can have a nice wrapper for so there's the error.php file. I'll go ahead and open up the exception one too. Okay, so the error.php file basically includes an email. The email function we'll look at in a second. And it puts a nice message together for the user, for the developer to see. That's what the error.php file does. We'll look more at that in a second because you're going to be plugging in your Gmail stuff here in a second. But the exception 2 includes that error.php file, which is the error handler. It also has in it at the top of the page a function called handler, which has 4 arguments: the error type, the error message, the error file, and the error line. So here is the echo statements for that. It talks about error messages here being echoed out to Rock Valley College, giving me the error messages, like error type, error message, error file name, error line. So what I've done is I've actually set an error handler called handler. Then I set a string called professor, spelled wrong on purpose here. Then I try to use the str replace to replace professor with something else with the correct spelling. But it will generate a warning because it takes 3 parameters in the str replace, and I've only given it 2 parameters. Okay, it should look like this actually right here. It should be str replace, the misspelling, the correct spelling, and then the actual variable that it's looking for and searching. Okay, so it only has 2. That's why it throws the error. So when it gets down on PHP to this line, PHP looks for the error handler first. If it doesn't have an error handler, it gives a nice ugly error on the page. Okay, but because I put the error handler in there, it gives a nicer error handler, which showed here on the overhead. So instead of the ugly one, it gives this one. Okay, otherwise it would give everything that you had in the email, which the end user doesn't need to see. So it sets the error handler called handler. That's important on line 32. That's going to go to this function right here that I've highlighted. And in that error function, it's going to know immediately from PHP what the error type is from the compiler in PHP, what the message type is, or the message itself is, what the file and the line is. This is all built into PHP to know exactly what all this is. And you'll notice in the message itself, I actually have in here error type, error message, error file, and error line. And where's it being called from? It's being called from right here. So as soon as this error happens, which is going to happen on this line here, it goes to the error handler. If we didn't have that, it would give the ugly error for the user to see. We don't want them to see that. So that's the actual error handling part of it. In that file that you downloaded, if you're downloading it with me on the in-class, this one right here, it should download 2 folders actually, 2 folders. It should look like this right here. Let me go to mine real quick. XAMPP, htdocs, class, week 8. You guys should have PHP mail and validate, I believe. Is the 2 folders in there, right? We're going to look at, in the validate folder, we're going to look at the 3 files, index, thanks, and validate. And then in the PHP folder, I want you to open up in the PHP folder the email.php file only. So 4 files, all of them in validate, and in the PHP folder, I want you to open up only the email.php. And when you go to the email.php, this is where you're going to put in your email credentials for Gmail. So leave the @gmail in there, @gmail.com. Just put in your username and your password in lines 10 and 11. Okay, so go ahead and do that. And by the way, if it does not work internally here on campus, they sometimes block that from working internally, but it will work for you, at home, and also when you upload this externally to your web server. But for sure it'll work at home for you. So I'm Yeah, in fact, I'm trying to think. If you're using your student rockvalleycollege.edu, it might not work. You might have to create a brand new Gmail account, is what I would recommend. Because I think if I'm not mistaken, they blocked that from being used, the SMTP from being used on that one. But, it's doesn't take a few seconds to create a brand new Gmail account if you want. But anyway, you'll put in your username and password in these 2 lines, line 10 and 11, on the email.php. And then the other area you need to change is the validate.php. There is a line in here on line 44 where you put in your Gmail address and your first and last name. Your Gmail address and your first and last name on line 44. And those are the only 2 areas you're going to have to change. And we're using an actual Gmail class or a PHP class that lets us use our Gmail account. Or let's just use the Gmail SMTP client anyway. And then once you've done both of those, you can actually save it and try to run it in your XAMPP environment. I'll go ahead and try mine real quick here. I got to put mine in week 8. It's going to be in the validate folder. Validate.php. Oh, I don't have the navigation. Looks like I put in that navigation on your guys' index.php file. You don't need those first 3 lines. We don't need in the index.php file, which goes to a navigation path. It looks like we can get rid of that. It'll error out on that first line. It looks like if we don't. And this one's an actual form for users to fill out, which you would normally use for some type of email to make sure users fill out a form, and it sends it to a local inbox somewhere to collect data. So that's what this one's being used for here, this example anyway, using Gmail. And mine says it could not authenticate. My SMTP server could not authenticate, so it might be blocked internally here, possibly. So let me go back and check my settings one more time. Gmail, yeah. All right, mine wasn't saved initially the first time. That's why I didn't go. Okay, it looks like mine sent successfully after saving it correctly. And let's look here what the form looks like. Hello, your contact form has been submitted by Chuck Conkle, and it gives you all the information I filled out. And so let me come around and see if I can help you guys on that, on getting that to work for you.